The fight between Thor and Apocalypse and Rick Remender's Uncanny Avengers is one of these unsung moments in Marvel Comics. Nobody ever talks about it, but honestly, it's a pretty amazing fight. So what this does is this picks up in Scandinavia about 1000 AD, and Thor is just kind of partying as you normally do, right? Being drunk and telling stories. It literally says, the mortals come to him with boasts and challenges to drink, eager to test this purported god of thunder. And when they lose, they bray loudly, wounded pride, their senses atrophied by drink. They reach for swords, and he would have it no other way. It's why he returns here. He enjoys the attention, and he enjoys fermented drink. And he probably enjoys the women too, for its consumption leads to fighting, and Thor likes fighting. But the crazy thing is that in the midst of this, while Thor's just standing there, Apocalypse shows up. That's one of the cool things about it. It's not like one of these great, big, huge, grandiose things. Like, he shows up, the people around him are like, my God, it's a giant, right? And Thor's like, no giant. And your companion was warned, Thor, God of Thunder, has never lost a contest to a denizen of Midgard. And like Apocalypse just says, well, there's a first time for everything, and just cracks Thor over the head and sends him flying. Right? Like that, right off the bat. There's no crazy buildup, none of that stuff. You're like right off to the races, right? And he says, today is the day that you die at the hands of Apocalypse. Now, there is a reason why Apocalypse is fighting him, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But it says, the attack is intended to remove skull from spine, and were it not for the limberness born of his inebriation, it would have. And so at that point, Thor's pissed, right? And he picks up his battle axe, Jarnbjorn, because it is important to know this is before Thor becomes worthy. And so he says, coward, you strike with great force when your opponent's back is to you. How will you fare face to face with Thor, God of Thunder? And the response of Apocalypse? Quite well, I imagine, right? You are beneath me. The weapon you use to defend yourself is laughable, Odin's son. It is a shame that your father does not respect you enough to properly arm you. I do not fear you or your diminished clan of adulation-seeking gods. You will not deter a servant of celestial will. Now, he makes a reference to serving celestials. That's one of the big reasons why he's facing off against Thor, because he says, by killing you today, I will prevent a great horror from befalling all our people. And so the response of Thor, right? You speak in riddles and you offer nonsense. The grim weight of Jarnbjorn will wrest the truth from your crooked lips. And like, goes to hit Apocalypse with his axe, and nothing happens. It's a little bit of a scar on his armor, but it's certainly not enough to penetrate him, and it's absolutely not enough to destroy Apocalypse. And he just says, it will not. You are brash and arrogant, but beyond that, you are not fit to survive. And just headbutts the shit out of Thor, like literally just sends him flying, right? And it says, the impact sends shockwaves for 100 miles. His spine will not endure another like it, and he knows it. Beyond the deep fury, a small voice of reason. The craven hides behind indestructible armor. Thor would never flee. This is only intermission. He promises the rage in his belly. And at that point, he takes off, right, on his chariot, pulled by goats. And admittedly, on Apocalypse's behalf, it's probably kind of hard to take him seriously because the dude's riding off on a chariot pulled by goats. I feel like we've covered this at some point. I don't remember when, but at that point, Thor just says, we are far from done, devil. You have stirred the great fury of an Asgardian. And what's really cool about this, right? What's really, really cool about this is Apocalypse responds without an ounce of concern. Do all your insect brethren flee so quickly, little coward? And the response of Thor, you will find out soon enough what my children are capable of. And Apocalypse just kind of, humps at him and is like, unworthy. Now, there's something really cool to notice about this, right? Apocalypse is well aware of the Asgardians. He's well aware of Thor, and he's well aware of Odin. Now, how deep that knowledge goes, I doubt he knows the inner workings of Asgard and all the mythos and stuff that goes along with it in terms of like the true Asgard. If anything, he probably just knows the stories that have been told over the years within Earth, in the Marvel Universe. But the fact that he so comfortably approaches someone like Thor and fights him in this way is a testament to the level of confidence that Apocalypse has in his abilities and what he's capable of, plus the fact that he's pretty much almost indestructible. And that's what's so crazy, is because when Thor takes off, Apocalypse teleports back to what you and I might call a base of operations, but it doesn't belong to him. When he shows up here, there's just a guy sitting there, and he asks, "Killed him so quickly?" Right, you've evolved these past centuries, Apocalypse, and Apocalypse just says, "You lead me on a fool's errand, Rama Tut. The minor deity poses no threat to me." Yes, he's talking to Kang, he's talking to Rama Tut, and most of you guys who are aware of the history of Apocalypse know that when it came to Rama Tut's involvement in his life, that while it is technically a retcon story from Terry Kavanagh, the idea was that Kang the Conqueror went back in time in order to transform Apocalypse essentially into his heir, so that he could use the power of Apocalypse to ensure that he would be able to take over the world and defeat all the superheroes and so on and so forth. The fact that the two of them have struck a bargain here speaks volumes, because these guys despise each other. But there's a reason this is happening, because again, when Apocalypse says that Thor poses no threat to him, Rama Tut says, "Not today, I assure you, but in the future, Thor terribly muddies your plans, and mine as well, obviously, or why would I bother helping you?" And so at that point, Apocalypse just says, "Well, then be that as it may, he fled. So if you have another name for me, give it to me." Because what Rama Tut has been doing is giving Apocalypse names of people to basically target, take these individuals out. Now, the way in which this whole relationship between the two of them functions is that Rama Tut, basically Kang, we'll call him that, has effectively shown up here telling Apocalypse, there are certain people who are alive right now that in the future are going to wreak havoc on your life and basically make it impossible for you to fulfill your goal. And we'll talk about that goal here in a second, because it does become important. So in order to stop those people in the future, you have to stop them today when they are arguably at their weakest. That's the reason why he's being given names. And so that's where Rama Tut just says, the person you're going after is Folkborn Logan. Now, that of course is the ancestor of Wolverine. Kind of some time travel shenanigans, so to speak, right? If you destroy the ancestor of Wolverine, Wolverine will never be born, and you won't have to deal with him in the modern era. But at that point, you switch back over to Asgard, because the response of Thor in the midst of all of this is to go to his father, Odin. Now, this is a really, really cool exchange, and this is where the whole explanation of Apocalypse and his involvement with the Celestials comes into play. That Thor shows up to Odin and just says, "A black beast encased in nigh invulnerable armor has beset upon your son. I felt a great evil in his presence. This monster must be put down." And that's where Odin just says, "Be still, Thor," right? "I saw your skirmish. I know your foe. He is Apocalypse, evolutionary caretaker of the Celestials. It is their armor that he wears." Now, this is well established. We've long since known this in Marvel Comics, but notice what happens next, right? Thor says, "Fine, tell me how to pry this crustacean from his warm shell. Tell me how to splinter his cosmic armor." And the response of Odin? "No. That is not an option, my son. During the years between the celestial hosts, the Sky Fathers of the pantheons of Earth made a pact never to interfere with the Celestials." Now, this is true. In Marvel Comics, there came a point when the Celestials visited Earth and learning that the Asgardians had basically had ongoing affairs with humanity. And when I say affairs, I mean both ways, right? Involving themselves in what humans were doing and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes banging them. But the fact is, right, the Celestials didn't like that because it was interfering with their experiment. And the reality here is that as capable as Odin and the Sky Fathers are, where there was, a willingness to challenge the Celestials, they learned quick, fast, and in a hurry not to do that. And so ultimately they agreed, knowing that the Celestials could very well eradicate them from existence. And so ever since then, it's been a you stay away, I stay away type thing. And that's what Odin is telling Thor. We do not violate the pact that was made with the Celestials. And the reality is that Apocalypse is serving the Celestials. So by attacking him, you would in effect be violating the pact. And that's what goes on here. Thor's response to hearing about the pantheons and the agreement that was made with the Celestials and so on says, "Pantheon heads be damned. The celestial demon hunts Asgardians. Who knows what other evil schemes move him? If you know of something that can pierce his armor, then tell me what it is and quit playing this bureaucratic game." And Odin, of course, as you guys know, doesn't take lip off anybody. And so he stands up and he just says, "You forget yourself, boy. You must for once heed my warning. In winning the fight today, you would create a far greater catastrophe in the future." Which is true. And he says, "I will not aid you in this. Abandon your revenge." And that is when Loki shows up on the scene. Ever the schemer, right? Ever the manipulator here. But before we get further into that, while it's not technically covered in this part of the story, it is covered in a combination of Uncanny X-Force from Rick Remender and this. It's one of the reasons why, and I honestly really haven't mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning now. Rick Remender is very similar to Jonathan Hickman in the sense that you can read Remender's stuff during this era in time on its own, and it kind of transitions pretty well from one scenario to the next. When we talk about the idea of Apocalypse being a servant to the Celestials, you've probably heard the phrase, the Celestial Caretaker, that's kind of floated around when it came to Apocalypse. The reason why I never really bring it up, and the reason why I certainly didn't talk about it too much when we were doing our video on the history of Apocalypse or the nature of his character, is that it's not really a thing with him anymore. But at the time that this story was written, it was. In fact, it became a core part of him under the writing of Rick Remender. The way it worked is that, as most of you guys probably know about the Celestials, they travel the cosmos and they experiment on different races. When it came to humanity, for example, they created the Eternals, the Deviants, and then basically planted the gene in humans that would eventually become mutants. But for the character of Apocalypse, he became what was called the Celestial Caretaker, which is to say he is there to make sure that the evolutionary process happens, right? That effectively humans are forced to evolve. And that was the retcon that Rick Remender threw in here, which is to say that when he was writing the story, he was presenting the argument and saying that the reason why Apocalypse travels around the world and pits races against one another, tribes, groups, what have you, is in order to effectively separate the wheat from the chaff. And by only allowing the strongest to survive, what it essentially does is it forces evolution. It forces beings that have weaker powers to potentially adopt secondary mutations, think of new ways to use their powers in order to survive, whatever the case happens to be. And the source of Apocalypse's power is actually the Death Seed. That's what's presented here. Because one of the funny things is that if you go and you read a lot of what was happening with Apocalypse, whether you're talking about the Blood of Apocalypse story after House of M, you're talking about the Rise of Apocalypse storyline, or even if you go back and reference the old stories of Cyclops and Jean when they were time displaced and they ended up, during the days of Mr. Sinister, and Sinister was the one who explained to Apocalypse that he was a mutant because Apocalypse didn't know at that point in time. The reality is that we never really learned exactly how Apocalypse got his powers. We knew that he had a meeting with the Celestials. We knew that they offered him gifts and we knew that he accepted them. We largely just kind of assumed that they used their vast cosmic powers to just bestow all these abilities onto him, maybe modifying his genetic code. But instead, what happened with Apocalypse is actually not that dissimilar from what you saw in X-Men 97 episode 4. That kind of crystal that was given to him by the Celestials, that's a Death Seed, right? That's what he has in X-Men 97. That's what he had during Rick Remender's run. Now, the Death Seed has been shown to distort and twist personalities. I don't necessarily know if that applies to the character of Apocalypse because he was already on a pretty sinister path by the time he came across the Celestials in the first place. But the fact is, with David Lapham's Age of Apocalypse issue number 8, it was hypothesized that the power of the Death Seed rivaled the power of the Phoenix Force. Now, I say hypothesized, and the reality here is that the Death Seed is powerful, but I'm not aware that we've actually seen someone use the Death Seed to combat the Phoenix Force directly. I could have missed something, right? So just something to be aware of here. But the point is, this is what Apocalypse is doing, and this is the role he plays. Literally imbued by the Celestials with the power of the Death Seed, his purpose being to essentially take care of and to ensure that Earth evolves. And so again, focusing back on this moment with Loki here, when he appears to Thor, initially Thor just kind of like blows him off. Like, I am in no mood to deal with your shenanigans, Loki. Like, I promise you, today is not the day. And Loki's just kind of like, oh, that's a shame because, I know of a way to defeat Apocalypse. And Thor buys into it because understand something, this is Thor's ego that's been bruised here. That's really all it is. It's the only reason why he's invested in this. Apocalypse showed up, like headbutted this guy with the power of Christ, and now Thor is pissed. And so he's literally letting his pride and his arrogance get the better of him. And that's why he actually apologizes to Loki and says, if you know of a way of anything that can help me crush this Apocalypse, I would be eternally grateful. And at that point, they go to the library. And that's where Loki tells him, here it is, right? I discovered it before being banned from Father's library for snooping. Right? Can you imagine that? Me snooping, going into places where I'm not supposed to be. And he says, I made special note of it, given how well it was hidden. Fortunate for you, I have a special memory for well-protected secrets. And Thor responds, right? Secrets that you share out of the goodness of your heart, right? And Loki's like, no, absolutely not. He says, I will probably want payment in some form at some point along the line. So we'll just say you owe me a favor in the here and now. So hey man, at least he's honest about it, right? And that's where Thor says, on few occasions would I concede to such a pact, but you have me at a special disadvantage. And so that's where he reveals the nature of this, right? He says it's a simple enchantment, but one that can only be cast by Odin or his blood. It is a safeguard should the celestial executioner arrive to pass judgment. To basically say, Earth has failed, right? And that's the nature of it, because he says, if you perform the enchantment on your axe, Jarnbjorn, and kiss it, it'll be able to pierce celestial armor evermore. I mean, you don't have to kiss it, but it'd be kind of adorable if you did. And so at that point, Thor just walks off. And that's where Loki looks back at him and says, no need to thank me. Only for us to find out it's not Loki, it's Kang. Right? Now, here's the greater scheme that Kang has going on, because again, this isn't necessarily explained with this. In fact, Kang's scheme actually unfolds over the course of the entire Avengers run. You guys have probably heard of characters like the Apocalypse twins, different things like that. They're essentially the children of Archangel Warren Worthington. But the idea behind Kang is that while this is a very large and complicated plan, one part of it is ridding the world of the mutant population. Jarnbjorn will go towards that. But what also happens here, in fact, in the next issue after this, that the Apocalypse twins end up calling forth, or basically bringing in a celestial. They literally attract his attention. And when he shows up, the Apocalypse twins kill it, right? And that pisses off the celestials to no end. And that's where things get hairy. But before we get to that, at this point, we switch over to London, right? And it just says, the woman has a kettle drum for back end. And so I'm kind of inclined to believe this is London speak for she's got junk in the trunk, bounce a quarter off of that girl's ass. But not to be too crass, they're just kind of going back and forth and just kind of joking around and whatnot. But Logan is here, the ancestor of Wolverine. And that's when the Horsemen of Apocalypse show up here and immediately start attacking everybody. And as most of you guys are aware by now, the Horsemen of Apocalypse are, for the most part, his henchmen. Right? I wouldn't say that they do his grunt work, but they also kind of do the monotonous stuff that Apocalypse just doesn't really want to deal with in a lot of ways. But the reality, and really the biggest reason why they're here, is because no Apocalypse story is ever complete without the four horsemen, right? You got to have them there in some capacity. And for the most part, they start taking these guys out. And the crazy thing is they're honing in with the intention of killing Logan. And in fact, they actually start making fun of him. They start busting his balls pretty hardcore when he says, bring to me a guardian, basically ushering a prayer. He's told the spirits of the old gods dare not face us. The old gods do not listen for your prayers. And that's when Thor shows back up here with Jarnbjorn, cuts off the head of one of the horsemen, and it's just like, some old gods listen still, right? Just like what you would expect from Thor, and just starts taking it to these guys. He kills every single one of these horsemen, and he does it with reckless abandon. And the whole time, Apocalypse is watching this, and Apocalypse looks back at Kang and says, he's killed them, right? He killed my horsemen. And he says, you told me you could see the future, yet you never foretold me of this. And the response of Kang, I did not. But to be fair, I never told you many things, and then just teleports out because this part of his plan is complete, right? This part of his plan is done. And so Apocalypse just says, right, I'm not gonna forget this, Kang. I promise you, come hell or high water, I will get my revenge. And so where Apocalypse goes to literally start destroying London, right? The idea being that if the ancestor of my greatest future enemy is in London, then tonight London burns. Thor shows up, right? Throws Mjolnir at him, and Apocalypse catches it midair, which is pretty dope, right? Because Thor asks, what manner of coward kills a babe to save himself from future war? And the response of Apocalypse, only a fool doubles his efforts on a failed attack, young god. Your axe cannot harm me even when you manage to hit me with it. And he says, but it can harm you. And just like throws it back at Thor and hits him with it, right? Like it literally hits Thor. And he just says, thank you for saving me the trouble of hunting you down. Victory will be mine when all is said and done. There was never a doubt of one thing. And that's where Thor's like, let me guess, only the fit may survive. And like in that moment grabs Jarnbjorn and just smashes it through the shoulder of Apocalypse. And because it's now magically enchanted, it can pierce the armor of Apocalypse. It doesn't kill him, but it pierces the armor of Apocalypse. And he just says, your victory is hollow. You've cheated. I know not how, but I know it was some desperate maneuver, Insect Lord. And I know that regardless, this will be your tomb. And then he teleports away after setting the ship to self-destruct. And Thor, of course, grabbing on his goats, gets out of there, right? He just like bails out as fast as he possibly can. Well, here's the craziness of it. You pick back up in Asgard, where he's just like bragging to everybody, right? At the dinner table, talking about this great big huge battle that he had with Apocalypse, you know, and that, you know, Jarnbjorn cleaved him open and that kind of thing. Odin comes busting in, literally smashes the door open and is like, you great fool. Right? He says, if you understood what you have set in motion today, you would not celebrate. Your brash choice will cost Asgard and Midgard greatly. And that's where Thor just says, you worry about future problems while I solve the troubles of today, Father. I defeated evil and I saved lives. But that's the big difference, right? Kind of, you know, youth versus experience. The youthful are focusing on the here and now, right? Let's solve all the world's problems today. But the more experienced are like, yeah, but at what cost? Have you considered what consequences are going to befall your actions? And that's what Odin is telling Thor, right? You're so hyper-focused on the here and now, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're not paying attention to what will happen down the road because of your action. Now, this is not like a father and a son having an argument, right? Where the son's like, well, I mean, nobody can see what's gonna happen in the future, so the best you can do is focus on today. No, Odin can, and he knows exactly what's going to happen. And he says, that axe is a curse, a wrecker of worlds. It will remain your burden to bear. I cannot help you now. The lesson is yours to learn. And do not misrepresent your motives to me, Thunder God. You cared only for revenge, and you have doomed all to have it. Be it tomorrow or 1,000 years from now, the mistakes that you've made this day will haunt us all. Because at that point, you switch over to Brazil. And this is how Kang the Conqueror works. Literally just jumping back and forth through time. He'll jump to 1000 AD and then do a thing. And then he'll jump forward to see how that thing plays out. And that's exactly what happened. What he wanted was for Jarnbjorn to be magically enchanted to destroy a celestial. And that's what he achieved. He tricked Thor into doing it. Now, it can kill a celestial. And so that's why once Thor had lost Jarnbjorn to Baron Mordo, that all Kang has to do is travel to Brazil, because Thor, in his arrogance, and let's be honest, the narcissism of his youth, his inability to see past what he wants at any particular point in time, doesn't understand the full totality of what he's done, but Kang does. And so Kang, in turn, takes Jarnbjorn with every intention of using it to kill a celestial. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, drop a like. Pretty dope comic. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.